Liberty Nation. Truth is making a comeback.
Hello and welcome to Liberty Nation's LNTV. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. Now, unless you've been in a puppy-filled safe space this last 2 weeks, it kind of escaped your notice that a lot has been happening in the United States Supreme Court. Perhaps the biggest news is that Justice Kennedy will be stepping down. Now, to discuss this further and the wider ramifications, we're joined by Liberty Nation's legal affairs man, Scott Cosenza. Thanks for being here, Scott.
Hi, Mark.
Now, the first question. Already there's been a lot of pushback and demands for President Trump not to go ahead with the nominations. Now, I've heard of the Biden rule being bandied around. I mean, what's the real situation here, Scott?
Mark, the Biden rule, just to get that out of the way, that refers to the 1992 Joe Biden talk or speech when he said that then President Bush should not appoint a new Supreme Court justice nominee, and that the Senate shouldn't consider it because it was a presidential election year. I don't think anybody referred to it at the time as the Biden rule. It's more a Mitch McConnell creation. And when Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton were running against each other for president of the United States, at that time, Barack Obama had nominated Merrick Garland to replace the deceased Justice Scalia. The Senate Republicans said, we're going to invoke the Biden rule here and wait until after the election, hopeful that Trump might prevail and then they would get a different nominee, which of course is what happened, and we got Justice Gorsuch. Now, the Democrats have been very upset over that, that Merrick Garland wasn't, there was no hearing given for President Obama's nominee, Merrick Garland. So now they're saying, well, we'll do the Biden rule, which is to say that there's the midterms elections happen in November. 1/3 of the Senate is up for grabs. There's a marginal, Republicans have a majority in the Senate, but a marginal one by a vote or two. And so there could be a chance where they could make the election about the Supreme Court and effectively turn more seats. So they want to wait to be sure. But Biden's rule was about a presidential election year only, by the way. It's very explicit. I just reread a few minutes ago Biden's speech from 1992, just so I could familiarize myself with it. And he says in a presidential election year, not an election year. So in any case, it's not a real rule. It's just a suggestion. And Democrats and Republicans are both totally craven political animals when it comes to this. And there's no way either one of them would give up the chance to appoint a Supreme Court justice. So consequential are the decisions that those justices make.
Yeah, I remember reading something about Mitch McConnell actually pointing out that this kind of thing would come back to bite them in the ass at some point.
Well, the nuclear, so we talk about the nuclear option.
Yeah, that one.
We used to have a situation whereby the Senate rules for themselves. In other words, the senators set up their own rules for the operation of the U.S. Senate, and their own rules of comedy made it that nominations wouldn't be reported out of committee, or they basically wouldn't hold votes on nominations if there wasn't a 2/3 sort of a supermajority present. And Harry Reid is the one who took that away, the sort of nuclear option. And so now they're going to just go through with a simple majority. But if Democrats didn't change the rule to benefit their own, or I should say, with their own perception of their own benefit for nominating process, we wouldn't have a candidate that couldn't get a significant amount of Democrat senators to support them. That's not the case now. Administration is going to be able to get a candidate through. Whether I personally will support that candidate, we'll see. I'll wait and see what names they throw down. So the list that Trump gave, though, prior to the election, so just so people are clear, President Trump, before he became president, did something that I think no major party candidate has ever done, which was announced in advance the broader list from which he would take his Supreme Court nominees, so that people who were interested in this as a major political issue, and I think it's appropriate that people are, they could see for themselves, okay, this is the universe of people that Trump will consider.
Yeah, I also read about Gorsuch, and that there was so much opposition to Gorsuch from the Democratic side, despite when I think he was also nominated previously, wasn't he? And that there was no dissent against him being elected previously.
So right, you can be forgiven a little bit for your terms there, being a non-U.S. based person. So Gorsuch was nominated for a lower court position. He was on the Court of Appeals in Colorado, and it was with respect to that nomination that he faced almost no opposition. And the reason why is because he is and was a very mainstream candidate. He was not an outlier. He has what appears to be a libertarian-ish, small government conservative bent to his jurisprudence, to be sure. But the idea that he's somehow some crusader that needs to be, kept away from our courts is a bit rich.
Yeah, he's not wearing an NRA T-shirt under his robes or anything.
Well, that actually shows you the difference in the stakes. So, Court of Appeals judge is one of many courts of appeals judges, and a Supreme Court justice is one of 9. And one of 9 is a much stronger position to have when that body is really in charge of determining so much of American life, whether guns are legal, whether abortion's legal, whether these taxes are legal, who can travel here, who can stay, and who has to go. These are all foundational questions. And I think it's unfortunate, but how we have our government set up now is that as long as 5 Supreme Court justices agree, then that's what's important, not what anything else might be true.
Actually, that brings up an important point for me, because as you mentioned, as a Brit, I'm not overly familiar with the minutiae of this, but I often hear about the 5-4 decisions not being a clear, bright line. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean that certain elements of the decision are open to being challenged at a later date? Or what does this mean?
So what a lot of people who are watching the court are looking for is what we call bright line ruling or bright line test, because the Supreme Court's rulings have such ripples, if you will, in the pond for so many other actions. So, for instance, there was a case decided last week, Lozman v. Riviera Beach, I believe was the citation, where a man was arrested for speaking out in opposition to a town council at a city council meeting. And they didn't like him, and so they directed the police officers to arrest him. Now, what those of us who were on the sort of pro-liberty side were hoping for was a bright line test whereby the Supreme Court would say anytime government officials direct police to arrest someone because of the words they're using, that's an imposition against their free speech rights and is illegal. But that's not what they held. They held in this particular circumstance, and they drew their ruling. In other words, the words they used to craft the ruling were like, if you have a citizen who is situated thusly and says these things, and the ruling from the government comes down in a certain very particular way that happened in this set of facts, which is unlikely to reoccur, he wins. So while we're happy, those of us who are small government advocates in any case are happy that Mr. Lozman won the case, we don't have going forward a sort of precedent that buoys us with respect to other engagements with the government. So that's what a bright line ruling in that case would have said. And that's something that people look to so that we don't have to have years going forward of more litigation to determine where these lines are.
Okay, so a bright line ruling essentially means that this protection is in place, it's been thoroughly debated, and we can assume that if a similar case, maybe not the same specifics, but if a similar case goes forward, then the ruling will apply over this case.
Yeah, so we take abortion. If we take abortion, for example, what the Supreme Court could have said in Roe v. Wade was all abortions are legal in America until X day of gestation or X day of trimesters, and the following methods are appropriate, and they could have done that, and then we would know what the law is. Instead, they talk about how the majority decision establishes that there is some right of an abortion, but then leaves nebulous what the exact parameters encompassing that right are. And then you have a 30, 40 year plus legacy of litigation in order to sort of fill in those blanks. And there are reasons why the Supreme Court, what's that?
Keeps judges and lawyers in jobs.
For sure. Yes. That's a pleasant side effect for some of us, I guess.
Okay. I mean, Scott, let's make you king for the day. You have the choice. You have the complete power. Who do you put in for the Supreme Court?
I like where you're headed with the question. It's a lovely proposition to consider. No,
I could have said queen for the day.
right.
Either one.
Thanks for that. I think I might appoint a non-lawyer just for form. I think that too often the court draws from a very sort of narrow pool of talent from elite, often Northeastern law schools, which I tend to want to shift away from. But there's if I was going to stay in the legal world, there's a guy called Eugene Volokh, who is a brilliant legal writer, and the Volokh Conspiracy is the name of the online outlet that he writes for, published, I think, currently by Reason. And in any case, Eugene Volokh, I think, is a bright, very bright mind. Tim Lynch, formerly of the Cato Institute, who ran their criminal justice, who was in charge of their criminal justice legal efforts, I think is also good and young enough that, you know, sort of, this is a dance where you want to pick somebody who's distinguished enough to have the career that warrants a position on the court, and yet at the same time young enough that you're going to get a lot of years out of them in production before you have to have the fight for another Supreme Court justice. So I would say Eugene Volokh or Tim Lynch would be, they would be on my short list.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for your input on this, Scott, and thanks ever so much for taking the time to join us. I've really learned a lot.
Thanks, Mark.
All right. And the biggest thank you goes to you at home for watching. You make it all worthwhile. Well, now you can have the facts at your fingertips with the new LibertyNation.com app. Simply download LibertyNation.com from the App Store or the Play Store, and you'll be good to go. On the go. Now, we're doing a prize draw this week for our exclusive Liberty Nation Truth is Making a Comeback caps. You just subscribe to the channel and make sure to leave a comment down below. We'll make a random selection of the comments, and if your name the comment doesn't have to be good or bad, just a comment. We'll draw your name and we'll send you a cap anywhere in the world. Thanks again for watching. Take care.
But if you can't say something nice, don't say it at all.
Better. Thank you.
Subscribe and like this video. LibertyNation.com, where truth is making a comeback.